Hello, this is Nathaniel, and you are currently watching a fast-forwarded time-lapse video of myself drawing in Photoshop. For this one, I'm pretty much just going to leave it as is, not too much editing, and as it plays through, I'm going to talk a bit about what I'm doing in the drawing. So right now, as you can see, I'm starting with a really simple and loose sketch, which I often do for more complicated topic matter, like for example a mech or a character or a city with complex perspective or something like that. It's really useful just to have later on when you're painting. And then after I got a sketch, which again, you don't have to take your time, you don't have to take too much time on this, you can really just rough it out to give you an idea. Once you get it to the point where you can kind of understand it, you like your basic design, a really easy way to start rendering is using selections. So throughout all these videos, this one and the last one I did, probably the next one as well, I haven't been using any photo textures, and all the brushes are just default Photoshop brushes, no textured brushes really, or no photo texture brushes, I should say. Um, which I really do that just because I think that in a way, photo textures obviously they're a really good tool to use. Like they make it so much quicker to draw, so much easier. You can get a lot of detail really quickly without hardly having to do anything. But they're also kind of dangerous if you're just starting out, in the sense that they can take away from your learning. So you can really quickly become dependent on them, and all of a sudden you're not really drawing anymore. You're just using a bunch of images and bashing them together, which is fine. You like have your fun with it and everything, but also you got to remember to keep actually drawing and practicing the skill. As far as rendering goes, a technique I like to use a lot, which you'll see me doing over and over in all my drawings, is using the selection tool. And what you do is you select a specific piece of armor or plate or a cylinder or whatever it is, whatever shape you're trying to draw, and then use a soft brush or a brush with soft edges. It could be an airbrush or it could just be like I'm using a cloudy brush, I think. And then what I do is I just shade within that selection. So what happens is you get the sharp edges of the selection around your, in this case, armor plates. But then within those armor plates, you get the soft gradients of rounded edges. And that's how I was able to get the kind of smooth round feeling on the legs with the sharp edges, and it just is so much quicker than having to switch back and forth between a sharp brush and a soft brush manually. Doing it with selections, it makes it really quick and really easy, and it's fun, and it's like just a technique to ease the process so you can focus more on design and less on rendering, which that's always my goal, is to focus less on what the whole process of it and just be able to let your mind run free and focus more on the creative aspects of it. For those of you who might be wondering, just a bit ago I flipped the screen, so I mirrored the image. And the reason I do that is because when you mirror the image, it's almost like your mind has to refresh. It has to reanalyze what it's seeing, and it'll help you notice all kinds of mistakes that you might not have noticed before, just because you kind of get numb as you're drawing. You're seeing the same thing over and over and over so long. You kind of get numb um, to the mistakes, and when you flip it, then you'll start to notice, like you might notice if you have disproportional errors or perspective stuff that might be wrong, and that's what every once in a while I like to just flip it and make sure I'm still on the right track. That's a good thing to do, and if you haven't tried that before, definitely do try it. At this point, I just keep on rendering, and after a while you get used to it. You don't even have to think about it anymore. At first, for me at least, I had a hard time rendering, and I kind of hated it. I didn't like it. I much preferred coming up with the idea and making the sketch and everything. Then rendering was my least favorite part. But eventually, it's just like effortless. It just happens and then you move on. So here I'm doing my first attempt at the character on the robot's knee, and I end up doing this all over because I just didn't like the way she was standing. So I deleted her and started from scratch, which in general might not be a good idea. Like if you're working for a client and you need to get it done by a deadline, it's kind of a waste of time. But for this one, I was just having fun and I wanted to make it really look good and to my satisfaction at least. And so I took the freedom to start over. By the way, be careful when drawing faces. There's a strange thing that happens since we're all human beings and we see each other every day, and I don't know, you just know your species better than others. If there's anything off about a human face or a human body, like posture or proportion or anything like that, it's going to be way more noticeable than it would be on something else like a mech or an animal or something. So that's something to keep in mind. Right now I'm drawing the background, and for the background on this one, I kept it really simple because the focus of the picture was just the mech. I wanted to put an environment there so that it had like kind of a world to sit in, but there was no reason to go all out and make it super detailed. It's just like a kind of a placeholder in a way, and I think it looks fine despite that. It didn't really need to be super detailed or anything. I really like the look of architecture and mechanical and man-made kind of stuff combined with the nature, like the randomness of it. I think that it goes really well together. Another thing to keep in mind about backgrounds is, especially with the mech clearly being the center focus point in this picture, you don't want the background to take away your attention or the attention of the viewer. So if I were to make it super detailed and intricate and have a perspective that really draws you in, the viewer might kind of get drawn into the background and miss the main topic. So you don't want it to upstage your main focal point. And that also goes for not only just like how detailed you make it, but also the amount of contrast. So the background is kind of bland, it's pretty gray, and the buildings aren't super colored, or they almost blend right in. And then the robot, it's got a little more high contrast with the dark mechanical parts underneath and then the pretty bright armored plates over top. It's also more saturated than the background, and therefore it pops out a lot more. It's still the center focus point. And then later on, when I add the final version of the character, which I'm starting right now, final attempt, made the character, which again it became the focus point. So now you got the character, and then the mech it's standing on, and then the background as your final piece. The character becomes the most important, and again you want to have the character stand out, so I made the character more high contrast even than the mech by having her be pretty much a black silhouette with shiny armor. So now you have black color with really reflective white spots on the armor, which is as high contrast as you can get pretty much because you have dark and then light. When you render out a character, it's just like rendering out the mech. It's same kind of process. I went with the black silhouette, and it's even got the same armor plates and everything, so I just use the same technique. Did pay a little more attention to the posture and the proportions, because again, the fact that it's a human character will make it really noticeable and obvious if there's anything off about it. As you can see, it's really high contrast. Like I said, you want that main topic of the image to attract the eye more than anything else, so it's as high contrast as you can get with the black and white. And then The mech is slightly less high contrast, and finally the background pretty gray and monotone. Made her pretty chiseled too, because that's cool. Another thing to watch out for when drawing characters is, in addition to the proportions and all that, being emphasized by the fact that they're human beings and we notice everything that's wrong more so than with other creatures or things. Um, Proportions for human characters or characters in general in the game industry and all that, they're kind of twisted. They're not very realistic. Like you'll have like unusually skinny waists and broad shoulders and strange posture, which just isn't realistic. And it can like look cool. It can emphasize certain characteristics of the um, of the personality, but it's also kind of bad. It messes with your image of things. So I'd say it's worth it to look into how these things really look, and then just be true to the reality. You may have just noticed that I threw in some blue in the shadowy corners of the mech where it's darker, and the reason for that isn't necessarily because it's more realistic, but blue is a cold color, so it's associated with darkness for some reason, and just like yellow is associated with light. A good example of this is how in movies, whenever you have a nighttime scene, you'll notice that the color becomes like a pretty saturated blue, very noticeable. So that same theory at play. I just lit up the sky a bit, and the reason for that is because you always want your light source to be the brightest part of your scene, because if you have a reflection that's brighter than the light source, it doesn't really make sense, because light should always diminish from the light source. So keep that in mind and make sure that your light sources are always brighter than the reflections or the characters or anything else. Now I'm adding some fabric to the character, which is always fun, just to give it some variation and try and see if you can figure out how the cloth will wrinkle. And there you go. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below and I'll do my best to answer it. And if you did enjoy this video, subscribe for more and share with your concept art friends.